The US Army's next generation M1E3 Abrams main battle tank is legitimately insane, in the best way possible. I dug up this list of proposed capabilities for the new design that include an autoloader, new main gun, new turret, hypersonic gun-launched missiles that maneuver in mid-air, the ability to pair with robots, masking capabilities to reduce thermal and electromagnetic signatures, AI systems that detect incoming fire and prioritize return fire, hybrid electric drivetrain, reduction of crew from 4 to 3, reduction of weight from 75 tons down to sub 60 tons. But the coolest thing is it'll likely get a brand new sleek hull for the first time in 30 years. Now you know where all the rumors come from that I'm secretly attracted to main battle tanks. What we're witnessing, I think, is US Army leadership reversing course on decades of tank design philosophy to do a last-minute complete overhaul from the ground up based on new lessons learned from the war in Ukraine. In this episode, we're going to explore how these changes might affect the future of tank warfare, what new tactics the M1E3 Abrams will allow for, and will people ever stop saying that tanks are obsolete? I'm your average infantryman, Chris Cappy. Hit the like and subscribe button and let's find out. But first, this video is only possible thanks to our sponsor, Policy Genius Life Insurance, a one-stop shop to find and buy the insurance you need at the right price. Policy Genius is the country's leading online insurance marketplace. It saves you time and money so you can provide your family with a financial safety net today. For those of us who served in the military, I'm sure you remember how much the administrators pushed the SGLI on us because it's important to have that safety net for our families. Now, as civilians, we still look for this same level of care, and Policy Genius is one of the best around. And with thousands of 5-star reviews on Google, customers have agreed that Policy Genius makes getting life insurance as easy as possible. With Policy Genius, you can find life insurance policies that start at just $292 per year for $1 million coverage. Some options are 100% online and let you avoid unnecessary medical exams. Check life insurance off your to-do list and head over to policygenius.com/taskandpurpose or click the link in the description to compare free life insurance quotes from top companies and see how much you could save today. Let's first start with the things that go boom. The new M1E3 has some serious firepower upgrades proposed for it, the most surprising of which I think is a recommendation that has the potential development of a gun-launched anti-tank guided missile. Russian tanks have had the capability to fire tank cannon-guided missile rounds since the 1970s, but most Western tanks do not. Why is that? There are a number of reasons. One is that some Soviet tank cannons weren't able to get long enough range and accuracy compared to their NATO counterparts. Soviet tank designers wanted to be able to hit helicopters at long ranges too with these missiles, and the United States did develop 2 separate tank-launched missiles, but they canceled the first one in the 1990s. The reason for this is because sensors at the time couldn't accurately identify targets out past 5 kilometers range. It was also canceled because of some offensive tweets it made about Chinese tanks years ago. However, I was shocked to learn that in one test, a US Abrams fired a prototype missile from the cannon and hit a moving T-72 tank at a range of 8,600 meters. We're talking, of course, about the XM943 tank round, or the Smart Target Activated Fire and Forget staff. But the Army never invested in it to go full-rate production. Part of the reason for this might be because it's also true that tank-launched ATGMs have a smaller warhead, and they don't perform as well against modern composite armor compared to the 1970s. So why are they resurrecting this retro program? Take a look at this US Army terrain analysis real quick. Army engineers went out into the field in Latvia and Lithuania. They used laser rangefinders to test how many points tanks would be able to fire 5 kilometers with a line of sight to a target. You're looking at the red circles of 25 different points that are scattered throughout Latvia and Lithuania border that they tested. The results were that there were actually numerous locations suitable for that long 5-kilometer range engagement that might make use of a tank-fired ATGM. However, training on tank-fired guided missiles would be difficult. That's why I'm advocating that the US Army invest in these training rigs for our future warriors. Do it for the sake of our future warriors. Hua? Glenn Giorno, former 19-kilo M1 armor crewman at the US Army, who was involved in the development of that anti-tank guided missile round, said, quote, "We could not find a way to implement and identify friendly or foe system that could not be exploited by a near-peer adversary. The projectile didn't care if you were a tank or an ambulance. Money was instead invested in making higher resolution thermal sights for the M1A2, which can now have a 50x thermal sight. I even acquired some footage of one of those new anti-tank munitions being loaded up. Energy drinks are now mandatory, standard issue kit for every American M1A3 tank crew.
This suggests to us that new technologies developed since then and higher quality thermal optics could make cannon-launched missiles worth exploring again for the M1E3. However,
the new XM360 cannon and its ammo could keep tank-fired ATGMs unnecessary for Western tanks. The gun actually has the same bore diameter of 120mm that the M256 currently has equipped on the Abrams, but the new one uses composite barrel construction. It uses electrothermal chemical ignition to lower weight by a full ton while still adding punch. It's still in the experimental stage, but using ETC technology, a similar 120mm gun projectile was tested in 1990, and it had up to 17 megajoules of muzzle energy. Stop, I can only hua so hard, you guys. That's like the same amount of energy as a full-speed car crash to the teeth. It's about what a conventionally powered 140mm cannon could produce.
Fellas, is my fixation on 120mm smoothbore cannons normal?
The current Abrams gun goes up to about 15 megajoules of muzzle energy. The way it works is it involves using an electric current to generate plasma, which then ignites the chemical propellant behind a projectile. This method allows for more precise control of the ignition process, resulting in higher velocities and improved accuracy and range for projectiles. It's like supercharging the way a gun fires its ammo. It reminds me of like the hybrid 6.8mm ammo on the XM7 rifle. To ensure victory, the employment of a mass of tanks in a decisive direction with overwhelming firepower is essential. These three gentlemen you see here are the United States military's top decision makers responsible for the new Abrams. They're Brigadier General Geoffrey Norman, the seasoned combat veteran of the crew, Major General Glenn Dean, the aerospace engineer, and Colonel Thompson, the strict yet fair Deputy Director of Soldier Lethality Cross-Functional Teams. Now, they're the A-team of American tank design, with decades of experience between them, and seeing them work makes me want to say hua in the most unironic way. Working with them is a team of technicians in Eastern Europe who are in direct contact with Ukrainian tank crews to learn insights on how the Abrams is performing in high-intensity warfare. These insights then inform the direction of development. General Norman said, quote, "We appreciate the future battlefields pose new challenges to the tank as we study recent and ongoing conflicts." End quote.
Because the stakes are high here, right? The open source intelligence website Oryx claims that 14 of the 31 Abrams tanks have been knocked out so far.
This ultimately led to them being pulled from the front lines because of a number of reasons, including that they were too vulnerable to air attack and too heavy. They were reworked and sent back into the fight since then. And I know it's not a one-to-one comparison, but I think it does reveal some of the vulnerabilities of the old M1A1 Abrams that we're going to be seeing addressed here with this new model. According to General Norman, we anticipate having to change the crew configuration, potentially looking at opportunities to go to a remote turret or an optionally manned turret in order to save space under armor. So they're going to link the new cannon to a remote-controlled, optionally manned turret. By switching to an autoloader and making the turret interior smaller, that's a lot less volume that has to be protected by heavy armor, which equates to a lot less tons of armor. Chat, what do you guys think of that? So interestingly, the new cannon wouldn't be manually loaded, it would be fed by an autoloader, like a machine that automatically loads the new rounds up next. That doesn't mean that its ammo would explode like the T-72 series of autoloaded tanks though. Newly designed autoloading tanks can have all of their ammo secured behind a bulkhead blast shield and can work with blowout panels to prevent detonation from cooking the crew. It depends on how they choose to design it. If all or most of the crew are in a separate compartment down in the hull, the turret itself could act as a barrier between the crew and the ammo. We've also seen from combat in Ukraine that the Abrams engine deck, with its air intakes and radiators, is a popular target point for drone swarms. So the Army's looking at unique ways to keep the engine better protected from above without sacrificing cooling performance. The new M1E3 Abrams tank would also upgrade from that puny 50 caliber machine gun to possibly the 30mm chain gun remote weapon station. The big advantage there is that it could fire specially made 30 mics that provide air burst capability for shooting down drones. Organic to the vehicle air defense. That firepower increase makes the hairs on my cock broom stand at attention. I heard all the good 19 kilos have nice mustaches. The tank, like the airplane, may be said to be the answer to the prayers of the modern infantryman. One of the most important things you need to know about new tanks is that in the past, when the Army decided to upgrade a tank, they didn't design a whole new tank hull from scratch. Instead, they took an existing one from the roughly 2,500 already in service and then modified it, or they would grab from one of the 3,700 retired husks collecting dust and storage. Many of those are located in California in the desert, out in the middle of nowhere at the Sierra Army Depot. The old Abrams is then transported by rail to a facility to have a complete makeover, being refurbished and upgraded. Are you tired of your old clunky main battle tank? It's time to upgrade your ride. Introducing the M1E3 V3 Abrams, because why park when you can create your own parking lot? Every decade, the Army rolls out a new systems enhancement package, so come on down and settle for one of our refurbished year 2000 V1, or how about a 2010 V2, or even a 2020 V3 Abrams. We've gutted the old beasts and replaced everything. Communications, GPS, thermal imaging, fire control, you name it, we got it. We kept the classic hull and turret that you've known to love about the Abrams because it's the opposite of planned obsolescence, it's maximum efficiency. Also, it saves you millions of dollars. Yeah, it costs $24 million each, but no one can get mad at you for buying it because now you have a fucking tank. We have to remember that systems enhancement packages was always supposed to be a stopgap, temporary band-aid solution for the Abrams, because the service thought that they would do with that until a full replacement vehicle was chosen. That's how we ended up with like a dozen different variants of Abrams tanks with various levels of advanced features. In the early 2000s, the XM1202 mounted combat system was supposed to replace all the Abrams, but funding for the program was cut in 2009, a trend that would continue because starting in 2013, the public and Army leadership started to question why we even had tanks in the first place. I mean, they're pretty damn expensive, and you rarely need them in a fight against enemy insurgents. So in 2013, the military closed their M1 Abrams factory in Ohio to save $1 billion. The problem is, we lost hundreds of skilled tank engineers, and it cost a ton to get the assembly line back in action. But the factory was reopened in 2017 with funding that breathed new life into the Abrams tank development. The cost to upgrade 165 Abrams to the V3 is around $1.75 billion. That's actually relatively cheap in defense dollars by not requiring brand new hulls or turrets to be fabricated. The main difference between the M1A1 and A2 is its electronics. However, with this new M1A3, it's now likely to have a whole brand new hull and turret. There's conflicting reports on that, but I can't see any other way that we get the kind of weight reductions that they're looking for without a whole new hull with different types of composite armor. That's part of the reason why the M1E3 is so big of a deal.
Is it just me, or does that new hull look really good? That is one nice looking hull. This better not awaken anything in me.
In 2023, the Army shocked the entire defense world when they decided to cancel plans for the System Enhancement Package version 4. The first version of the Abrams tank weighed 54 tons. V4 that was canceled was on track to weigh over 75 tons. Add in a mine plow, and it was going to break the scales at 83 tons. The M1A3 that we're talking about is going to try to be under 60 tons for reasons that we'll get into. But how do you make a multi-billion-dollar decision like that? A choice that will affect thousands of soldiers, a decision that will ultimately decide whether future warriors will have the best equipment or not. The defense industry can be an opaque bureaucratic nightmare. The inner workings and the bowels of defense procurement can be a mystery, even for those who work in it. But in this case, I think it's important to understand that. According to a congressional research report, it was an Army Science Board study from 2019 that convinced these three key decision makers that we mentioned in the beginning of the video to develop the brand new M1E3. Now, what is the Army Science Board? It provides the military with world-class scientists, engineers, business and policy experts from the private sector and academia. That quiet engineering professor you had at Sarah Lawrence is moonlighting as a consultant for the Army, helping obliterate people halfway around the world. In May 2024, the first contract for a preliminary design went out to General Dynamics Land Systems based on the requirements from the Army Science Board. The over 200 consultants have been in the background and unseen. They're a rarely heard influence guiding U.S. Army procurement. They wield considerable power and are responsible for some of the most effective weapon systems since the Korean War. I went to the Army Science Board website to see if I could dig up any information on that report. I thought there's absolutely no way that this information is easily searchable for an idiot like myself, and yet there it was, all easily searchable. Quote, the M1E2 SEP 3 and 4 upgrades will improve effectiveness but not restore dominance. Near transparency in all domains will significantly increase the lethality our forces will experience. We will continue to have to fight outnumbered, exacerbated by a low MBT operational readiness rate and aging fleet. So the Science Board study influenced senior Army leadership to go in a new direction, recommending a $2.9 billion, 7.5-year-long program to develop a whole new tank. If you skim through the document, I think it's really interesting to note that they believe their main competition was the Russian T-14 back in 2019, which they mentioned 14 times throughout the document. Some of the most influential people in the U.S. Army weapons development R&D teams thought that the Russian T-14 tank was a potential real threat and were developing these insane new systems to counter its claimed abilities. The Army Science Board also recommended a whole new chassis in the documents. General Glenn Dean said, quote, the Abrams tank can no longer grow its capabilities without adding weight, and we need to reduce its logistical footprint. The war in Ukraine has highlighted a critical need for integrated protections for soldiers, built from within instead of adding on. Take a look at the Army Science Board unclassified chart here. You can pause it if you want to read the full breakdown of the Abrams weight components, but I think the thing to pay attention to here is that 50% of the Abrams weight is its armor. 15 tons is dedicated to the turret structure. They can save a lot of weight there with new production techniques like 3D metal printed hulls and computer-assisted designs. Brigadier General Norman said, quote, we are consistently looking at ways to drive down the main battle tank's weight to increase our operational mobility and ensure we can present multiple dilemmas to the adversary by being unpredictable in where we can go and how we can get there. One of the lessons learned in Ukraine is that tanks are sometimes dead meat if they're too heavy. They get stuck in the mud, they're too slow, not nimble enough to fire, and then escape from drones that are searching for them becomes impossible. Heavy tanks also limit the amount of locations that you can attack from. This makes your movement more predictable to the enemy. Evidence for this, and where I think the general's quote is coming from, is from the Army Science Board study. I put the link in the description if you want to follow along Barney style, but what you're looking at right now is the border between Latvia and Lithuania again. This is a terrain analysis performed by U.S. Army engineers of the Abrams mobility over wet and dry terrain. The first image shows us the dry season. Everything in green that you're looking at right now is where Abrams can move unrestricted. The second image, though, shows us the wet season. Now, everything that you're looking at in red shows us where the Abrams movement would be restricted, where they couldn't move at all or below 16 kilometers per hour. Unless you're colorblind, you can see mostly everything is in red here. The study points out that this means, from a tactical perspective, a defending force could easily mine trafficable routes, destroy bridges, to complicate Abrams combat operations during the wet season and funnel them into choke points. The reason for this has to do with the ground pressure of the tanks. Because of this, the study recommends new band tracks to lower the ground pressure to help fix that problem along with the lighter weight. You might think, okay, yeah, but it's a tank that's supposed to be heavy. But there are increasing costs to fielding a tank as it gets heavier. For one, heavier weight reduces fuel economy. By the time the SEP V3 rolled around, the operational range had dropped from 300 miles down to 264 miles. That means the Abrams burns between 1.5 and 3 gallons per mile. You heard me right, gallons per mile, not miles per gallon. The tank was originally invented to clear a way for the infantry in the teeth of machine gun fire. Now it is the infantry who will have to clear a way for the tanks. Churchill's quote is as true then as it is today. Here's how trusty FM3-0 explains the role of the M1E3 tank. This is an actual quote. FM3-0, it's like the U.S. Army Operations Combat Bible, but they say infantry protects tanks from enemy infantry and anti-tank systems, while tanks provide mobile protected firepower for the infantry. Ground maneuver can make enemy forces displace and become vulnerable to joint fires, while joint fires can disrupt enemy reserves and command and control to enable operations on the ground. General Norman, I follow you on X. If you're open to signing my copy of FM3-0, you can message me on my X or Instagram at CappyArmy, links in the description. The Army Science Board points out how much of a hidden pain it is to get the Abrams to the fight. It relies on limited number of British transport HETs, which are like giant tractor trailers. All I know is I wouldn't want to be an E3 stuck ground guiding that thing in reverse, helping to park that. In fact, American Transportation Command, Transcom, issued a statement that concluded, quote, the M1A2 SEP V3 cannot achieve transportable approval at this time, meaning that Transcom isn't willing to go out of their way and say that they approve of this vehicle for transportation wide scale. Anyone who has served in an armored unit knows how vehicles need to be towed often and then be recovered, even if they just break down. So it would take 2 M88 recovery vehicles to tow a SEP V3. The study found that the mean time between failures for the current Abrams was approximately 200 miles, which poses problems for extended operations. All of this is to say, we needed a redesign to solve these growing problems. So the M1A3 will be a combination of technologies from the canceled SEP V4 and the Abrams X prototype. It'll likely have the hybrid electric drivetrain that reduces fuel consumption by 50%, making it like the Prius of tanks, the hybrid power pack of the Abrams X, which may be incorporated into the M1A3, and it looks promising. With its greater efficiency, this could help reduce the signature of the tank to make it more stealthy. Its silent watch capabilities would be a huge plus, allowing you to monitor the battlefield without drawing attention to your location. General Norman confirmed active protection is a requirement for the M1A3, saying, quote, that's part and parcel to the vehicle survivability, profile, and design. That's one of the things that we know absolutely we will integrate into the program. Recent experience in the Israeli-Hamas conflict shows that the trophy system isn't the greatest at tackling cheap and plentiful drone drop munitions or FPV attacks, because current versions are limited to a 55-degree elevation. Trophy uses fairly large and powerful projectiles to counter threats too, which is less than ideal against swarms of drones that might attack a vehicle multiple times in a short time span. It's not only overkill, but it limits the number of charges the system can carry. My belief, based on reading these documents and listening to interviews with the key Army leadership about the Abrams tank, is that the future of armored warfare in the Army, the way the Army envisions it, is that they'll be preparing for a major change to tank tactics unlike anything we've seen since the introduction of the Abrams in 1980. Warrior Maven interviewed William Nelson, Deputy Commander, Army Futures Command, and he says that this running theme that I've seen throughout all these talks, where he says they all seem to believe that the future will be a combination of manned and unmanned platforms that are integrated with aerial UAVs. The M1A3 is the first step in that direction. The Army plans to adopt and start fielding the eventual M1A3 by the early 2030s. While defense acquisition projects always run into cost overruns and delays, the fact that General Dynamics already did that much legwork on the Abrams X tech demonstrator might iron out some of the few road bumps along the way. So here's hoping we see a production version of the M1A3, what it'll be named after the M1E3, rolls off the assembly line, blasting through the enemy instead of blasting through billions of taxpayer dollars before being canceled 2 years later now. Hula, I'm your average infantryman, Chris Cappy. I hope you liked this video, and I'll see you guys again